Before we get started, we like to recognize our community agreements, which were formulated by our Committee on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion here at AIA Oregon. We seek a community and a culture that's respectful, comfortable, open, curious, inclusive, and kind. Community agreements help us identify concrete ways to create that cohesive, safe space to exchange ideas, and that helps us interact more cooperatively and keep us on track for this type of important work. So I hope that you will all read through our community agreements, and I can't imagine not being able to agree to meet them, but if you have an issue with any or all of them, please let me know in the chat, and we will have a discussion about your continuing in the conversation. Can't imagine anybody doesn't want to follow those though. Given that today especially is Indigenous Peoples Day, we are here specifically also to, on this day, we recognize that we're gathering in the honor of and not in light of the native lands that we currently rest on and should honor not just today, but every day of the year. I can't imagine taking today without focusing in kind of closely then on our own tribes and our own backyard. And I think, was it Aaron that brought this to us last year, kind of to help us as a tool? I'm glad that we have this to take a look at, to just think of the number of people that have already touched the space that you're in. So if you'll take a moment to recognize that personally, we'll have a quick moment of silence. And then as we proceed, we will also then recognize our sponsors, because without them today, we wouldn't be able to put this on for free and to make sure that we can continue this message of why climate imperative is important and why climate action is important. So we specifically would like to thank Better Bricks, Bora, and Energy Trust of Oregon, of course, and Initech Windows and Doors. Thank you so much for being sponsors of our chapter and of this event. And with that, I will turn it over to Ellen.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Heather. And hello to everybody. I'm Ellen Shepard. I'm an outreach manager with Energy Trust of Oregon New Buildings Program. And I'm so happy to be the moderator of today's event and just give you a little bit of an intro to our session today. We are very honored to have our event be tied to Sustainable Building Week again. I want to say this is something we've done since the beginning of Sustainable Building Week, which is now at year 4 or 5. So we are just thrilled to have this event be kind of a nice way that kicks off the week on Monday. And as you can see on the slide, there's a tremendous number of sponsors that joined to celebrate Sustainable Building Week. There's both top sponsors and collaborating organizations. So if you want to take just a minute and look at those. And then moving into an actual calendar, and I swear this just keeps getting bigger and bigger every year as far as events, and it's nice to see some are coming back in person. There's also hybrid events, and there's also fully virtual events like this one. So hopefully there's something in there for everyone who can find a way to participate and celebrate this wonderful week of activities in the Portland area. All right, so jumping to today's event, this is the 2022 COTE Green Champion Summit. It's really an important topic, and it's one that I know many of you are thinking about daily in your work efforts. I'm not going to read verbatim here, but it's essentially just the Green Champion Summit is an opportunity to bring sustainability leaders from around our area, but also around the country. And we're honored today to have a few of those folks with us. This year we're gathering to discuss how our already strong efforts to reduce both carbon and greenhouse gases can be bolstered by new legislation, technologies, and practices. So as you kind of work through today, I encourage you to be thinking about questions as these panel of experts are talking about these different topics. And please put those questions in the chat, or you can hold them. We're going to have a robust Q&A at the end of the event. So please be thinking of your questions. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So there are continuing education credits for today's event. Here is the course number that you can use for your reporting. And I'll take just a minute for folks to jot that down. If you need to know this after the event, please do reach out and we can make sure you're connected with what you need for your reporting. I know that time is ticking down.
I'm going to place my email in the chat for exactly that.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Heather. Yep, it's getting near the end of the year, so some of you might be might be very anxious to get these in there. And as always, we have our learning objectives for today's event, and I'm going to give you just a moment to read these, but essentially it's about becoming better prepared to gain knowledge and to develop a plan. So please just take a look and kind of walk through those so you're thinking in that headspace to make the most of today's event. All right, and again, we're happy to send these out and help make sure that you're as prepared as you can be if you'd like more. So I'm gonna just take a minute and walk through our speakers today. We really have a wonderful panel that's gonna be joining us. Jeff Tuft is our keynote, and you know, I think it's amazing some of these when you read these bios, just the caliber of folks we have in our region, and both in Oregon and in the kind of Western US. And Jeff's one of those folks. He has a lot of connections with Utah. He graduated from University of Utah, and he is an associate at Architectural Nexus. So Jeff, I challenge each of, since I'm going to be kind of brief on the bios so that we can really get to what folks want to hear today, which is your content. I'm going to challenge each of the speakers when you come on, if you could say like 1 or 2 sentences of the top things from your bios that relate to today's event. That would be great. So, okay, so Jeff, well, I'm going to go through all the speakers and then I'll hand it back over to you to share your screen and get rolling. So Isaac Barros from Portland General Electric, and he's going to be joining us today. One thing that jumped out to me about Isaac is he's fluent in French, which I am as well. So Isaac, I think maybe you and I need to have some a coffee date where we speak only in French. So so heads up, that's coming. You'll see that in your inbox. We have Jacob Goodspeed also from PGE. Doesn't look like he speaks French, so sorry, Jacob, you can't join us on your lunch, but I'm pleased to see all of your wonderful experience with working with the carbon-free grid. And then we have Chandra Robinson from Lever. She's the principal there, and I don't know if you've all had the privilege of hearing her speak before, but she has a really nice way that she connects equity-based architectural foundations with climate change and her work with that. So I look forward to hearing that. And then Jacob Dunn with CGF is going to be rounding out our panel. And he's working with research projects with University of Washington that I think will be interesting to hear about. All right, so everybody, I'm challenging you with 1 or 2 sentences around your bio and how that connects with today's event. And with that, we will move into Jeff's session. So I'll stop sharing and let you take over, Jeff. And then we'll have some Q&A. But again, please put your questions in the chat and we'll have an opportunity in between each speaker to answer a question or 2. Thanks so much.
All right, well, thank you very much, Ellen, for the introduction and kind of responding to your challenge. I'd say there's nothing particularly impressive with my bio. I guess my claim to notoriety is having worked with Heather Wilson in a past life. And you guys are lucky to have her as your executive director of AIA Oregon. I spent a term as president of the northern section of AIA Utah and had the honor of working with her. So as far as your challenge goes, I'd say that's my claim to fame is Heather and knowing her. So, you know, I kind of thought as I was preparing for this, and I got to say, I'm somewhat embarrassed to be noted as the keynote here. If you know, probably a lot of you, if you're looking at the bios for the conference, saw my name and thought, who is this guy? And then you maybe went and did a Google search, looked to social media, and then you didn't find anything else there. But what I'm proud of is to be part of a great organization that we work collectively to make the world and just our environments and everyone we meet with better place. And I think our strength comes in numbers. We all are limited in what we can do, but we also all bring something individually to the table. And I'm going to go over a lot of things here, touching on just kind of the culture of our office, the culture of sustainability, but it's more than that. I think it's just a culture of trying to do good things and kind of do what's right and helping our communities and just, you know, making a mark how we can. So, you know, it starts with why. And recently we had a in-office training. I think one of the things we do is we really focus on training each other and gaining from each other's expertise in the office. And the question was asked, why does sustainability matter to you? And using that sustainability is kind of a loose term because it's, you know, can mean so many different things, you know, whether it's sustainability, regenerative design, green. But the thing that came to my mind was this, and I'm lucky to be presenting to you all in Oregon. One of my favorite places in the world is the coast of Oregon, and this was back from a few summers ago, a vacation we took over up there. And I just thought when I was asked the question, why sustainability matters, it's being mesmerized by these places, this beautiful earth that we have. And, you know, just asking the question to myself, what am I doing to, and what are we doing to protect this wonderful world that we have? So when the question asks, I think of things like that. I think of this is my daughter, Ava. Ava and I have a couple other kids, but Ava and I particularly, we love to ski together. So this is bringing it back closer to home, the beauty of our own natural landscape. Unfortunately, and if people that have been to Utah may recognize this theme through much of the winter, because of some of the unique geographic conditions we have inversion. So, which is high pressure that traps bad air quality underneath it in kind of the natural bowl we have. This is actually looking from the ski resort that picture is taking that and looking back down into the valley. That's Salt Lake down there. Those aren't clouds. That's not a winter storm. That's bad air. And so I think of those kind of things when I think about sustainability. So like I said, I just wanted to talk about kind of what we're doing in our office and things we've done. We, you know, I think for years we've been looking into LEED and other certification programs to improve the buildings we do. But the thing that we like to do, or we've committed to, is kind of getting some skin in the game. And we have a couple of buildings, one that's the first living certified building in California, and that's our Sacramento office, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. But we also are in the process of seeking certification on our office in Salt Lake City, so I'll show both of those. In Sacramento, we had a small office down there. We didn't own it. We wanted to claim something as our own. We didn't have an identity down there, and so we sought after a building that we could go and renovate. The most sustainable thing we do is give life to an old building. We in particular kind of sought out the ugliest building we could find almost, because we knew that we could reinvigorate it and give it new life. We could take the bones, something that had good bones, maybe wasn't particularly good to look at, and apologies if anyone's mother, father, grandfather designed this building. I'm sure it was wonderful in its day. But we found this building in our street in Sacramento, and we decided that we wanted to go all the way with it. So we, like I mentioned, it's a certified living building. I'm just, with the time allotment, going to be able to kind of gloss over some of the things we've done here. So I won't be comprehensive in this, but I wanted to talk about some of the big level things we've done. But just as a note, if you look in the street here, you can see kind of faintly, there's a couple of tracks in there. Those are rail tracks. I want you to remember those. I'll try to touch on those a little bit later on. So one of the big things, efforts we made here is with our water systems. And we have try to go back here, see if they'll let me. Okay. We have a robust system to capture rainwater on our roof. And you can see on the left side here, we estimated, and I haven't gone back to check, what we're actually collecting on here, but that it's kind of been verified that it's working. But we can capture 80,000 gallons of rainwater throughout the year in Sacramento, and the system, because of the size of systems we have, we can collect 26,000 gallons, which means you still have 53,000 gallons of rainwater that goes to runoff, but 26 gallons will meet all our water needs. Now, this is a little bit hypothetical. You'll see on the right that potable water is, we're in the state of California, and it holds true here in Utah as well. We're not actually able to claim water for potable uses. And so this is a little bit of a hypothetical, but we've designed our system so that once those laws come on board, statute changes, which we are advocating for, that we'll be able to meet those needs. So you can see we have some of that going to potable water, but then we go to whatever we collect that's not needed for potable goes to gray water, which is basically being, we use the gray water to flush toilets. We irrigate with it, and we also feed our living wall with it. And I don't know if you can see my pointer. You'll see some photos, but we'll show you what the living wall looks like. We also harvest our sunlight down there with photovoltaic panels that both cover our building and provide a shade structure for the parking. I was just speaking with our regenerative systems manager, and she was noting that historically now we're producing 140 to 160% of our used energy with the photovoltaic panels. So that strategy is both through the collection that we're able to do that, but it also takes occupant input. One of the most important tools that we have is our occupant behavior, and it's not just the buildings that we design. And I can touch on some of the things that we've done to better how we work as occupants of the building. So this is the green wall. We have electric vehicle charging, and our office cars fully electric down there. You can see the cisterns. We have 2 of those right now. When statute changes and we can harvest that potable water, we'll add 1 more cistern, and that should meet all our needs. These are our Phoenix composters. We have 8 composters. So this is, we basically have a sewage treatment plant on site. And to date, we haven't put any black water back into the sewage system. The sewage that treats through, or that comes into the system, takes about 3 years to work through these composters because we're a little bit oversized for our need. At that point, we are able to collect the compost from the system, and that's been tested as I can't remember if that was an A or B grade, but thankfully good enough to put into your garden soil, use in a vegetable garden. There's a small vial of leachate that needs to be disposed of, and then the rest of the moisture evaporates through the system. Other items we have are the solo tubes. So our daylight is primarily, we don't rely on artificial systems for the majority of the time. These solo tubes that you can see sticking down in the center and provide a really great quality workspace. As I mentioned, we see ourselves as a lab for learning, and there's a lot of different things we do to try to learn and be able to take our knowledge out to our clients. This is Erica McBride. She's our regenerative systems manager in the office. She has a very sophisticated title. She does a lot of sophisticated things, but not all the things that she does in the office are rocket science. For example, Erica sends out these emails and notifies us when the weather conditions, when our temperature and our air quality outside are acceptable to turn off our systems, open up the windows. Both our offices have operable windows and other systems that we can open up to the outside. So she sends us those when it's time to open up, and then when it's time to close for the day, we might get another email. We actually have a more sophisticated system. Hopefully you can see in the top right, there's a light there that's tied to computer systems that monitor the outdoor air quality and the temperature. And but we found that, a little bit of dumb technology helps us, and we rely on opening up and letting the outdoor air ventilate to meet our energy goals. We also have a program called Inhabit. It's a computer-based program that allows us to train the occupants of the building. So in the office, we'll have throughout the year several competitions where we use Inhabit to learn how we need to behave to be able to certify our buildings as living buildings, and just to overall decrease our demand on natural resources. As an office, we have a mandate to presenters that want to present lunch and learns to provide an environmental product declaration of some sort on their materials to be able to present to us. So we actually put stipulations on people that want to come in and feed us and take our lunch hour. And we're, as a company, we have a just label. And this basically, for those that aren't familiar, sizes up the health of our organization. And I put this out there. It shows different categories that we're doing great in, different categories that we're not doing so good. You can see clearly this is out for people to see, but we're willing to acknowledge where we lack and make efforts, and we have made efforts to close, gaps like a gender pay equity. We started out kind of low, and we're able to close that gap. You can see some of the gender and ethnic diversity. We have areas to work on, and we have systems in place to help us to help better where we stand in some of those places. The other thing we do is we have a alternative transportation competitions in the office. It used to be called Bike to Work, but we opened it up to carpooling and other things to encourage people to use forms other than automobiles to come into the office or to combustion engine. This actually happens to be an office bike in our Sacramento office. So people that carpool in, if they need to go to a meeting or to go somewhere for lunch, there's always another means of transportation. All right, probably getting a little long-winded. I'm going to try to speed it up. One of the things that's really cool, and may have been a little bit of a connection to Heather on being able to talk here, is a program that I was asked to help found a number of years ago with other associates in the office called Nexus Builds. Nexus Builds is the result of the need to gain more mastery as architects in the office and other things we do, and a philanthropy program that was suffering a little bit. The philanthropy program gave every member of the office, every employee in the office, 16 hours of paid volunteer time. And this wasn't being fully utilized. So several years ago, our president had the epiphany that we could merge and provide an action arm for the philanthropy program, but something that would give us an opportunity to go out and become better architects by learning to build. So Nexus Builds is a program where we built tiny homes and some other stuff to give us that real practical building experience. These tiny homes have been built and then donated to organizations. The first one, which isn't this, I'll show you photos later, was the Block Project in Seattle, which seeks to put a tiny home in every residential neighborhood in Seattle to help those that are experiencing homelessness, to provide a home, but not just a home, but a neighborhood and connections for them to live in. This particular home was done for a group in Utah called Fresh Start. Fresh Start helps people coming out of incarceration that have trouble finding housing, and they provide them a home and also a mentor family, which the home is placed on their property is an ADU, and they use this to get them kind of replaced into society with people that can help them, but that it also, they're able to take all the rent that they pay on the home they live in, which is kind of commensurate with what they can make, but it goes into an escrow account that then allows them to take that when they're ready to move on to something different than a tiny home and put that into the purchase of a new home. It's been incredible to do, and an incredible thing where we can do good in our communities, but also make us better. First home, like I said, was built for the block project in Seattle. We shipped it up there after we built it. They craned it over this house, and it came in, and it's a beautiful accessory dwelling unit in the backyard. We've also built carts for children with disabilities that are post high school, where they're trying to gain life skills to help them gain real world jobs. And in this particular program, the students would sell goodies in the halls of the high school, and they use these carts to be able to do that. I'm gonna just breeze through our last slides here. We are seeking living building certification on this office of ours in Salt Lake. We've gone through many of the same strategies that we did in Sacramento. We don't have a composting system here, but we have otherwise hand printed to meet those goals of the Living Future Institute. It didn't meet our model on this project, but we use gray water. We have green walls in here. This is our gray water system. So we use gray water to flush our toilets with, and to also feed our living wall here. I told you to remember those train tracks in Sacramento. And this is a bus stop, a future bus stop that we've done to advocate better mass transit in front of our office here. This is constructed with trestle wood, which is a wood recovered from a rail line that used to cross the Great Salt Lake here, a wooden trestle. This is a memento to the connection of the train line between our Sacramento office and Salt Lake. The Transcontinental Railroad, those tracks you saw were the end of the Transcontinental Railroad. Then, as you know, in Promontory Point up in northern Utah was where the Transcontinental Railroad went together. So this is a little nod to our connection to both offices. I'm sorry to kind of zoom through these, but I don't want to take from other presenters. I will just note that through our first year in the Salt Lake office, we've generated 109% of our energy usage through our photovoltaic farm on the office. And so we're on our way to certification with this building. I just wanted to note, some of the slides you saw here, these redwoods, and I have those in there on purpose. The redwoods are amazing, whether it's coastal redwoods or the great sequoias, the giant sequoias. They're these huge trees, and their root system, though, is surprisingly shallow. A lot of these trees only go down 5-6 feet, maybe 9 at the most. There's no taproot in them, but they gain their strength by their roots going sideways, and they interlink with each other. And with the problems we face in the environment today, we need to support each other, and it's through working together as teams that we'll be able to solve these problems we have. As Bruce now, as one of his design tenets, is that we need new wicked problems require new wicked teams. We need to work together. There's no such thing as the Renaissance man or person anymore. We need to have Renaissance teams to work together to solve these problems we have. And as we link together like the redwoods, we can grow high, and we can attack these goals and these problems that we have. So with that, I will stop my share and let the next speaker.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much. I love that redwood analogy. That's I think that's really powerful and amazing work that you've done and all those examples. We did have one question. So Isaac and Jacob, if you guys want to, as you're pulling up your slides and kind of getting those ready to go, Jeff, maybe you can talk to they're wondering if the ductwork in your office is fabric. And if yes,
so
could you talk about the pros and cons of using fabric?
That is a duct sock, which is a fabric duct. The majority of the ducts are in that. The main trunk lines weren't able to be in a duct sock, but the great benefit of that, there's a couple. One is it gives you a nice even air distribution. Is they're perforated throughout. They work well with a open ceiling system, not so well with a lay-in tile or something else. But you know, the thing we really love about them too is that, you know, you could send almost all your ducts out to the site in a single box, and so it just saves on that transportation need.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the presentation. Okay, so maybe if you want to mute and turn off your camera, let's let Jacob and Isaac turn on your cameras, and you guys can tell us a little bit about the zero carbon legislation on the West Coast.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Glad to be here. Jeff, thanks so much for the really insightful presentation leading into this one. I think that we are absolutely going to build on your redwood analogy here as we talk about Oregon's zero carbon legislation, how PGE is working toward that, how we are interacting with our peer utilities and partners throughout the West. So my name is Jacob Goodspeed. I'm on PGE's renewable energy team. So my role thinks a lot about the future, and specifically as we think about our decarbonization targets in 2030 and 2040, how do we make sure that we're able to acquire and provide the clean energy that we need to ensure that we're operating a zero carbon system? So happy to talk a little bit about that. I'm joined by my colleague Isaac today, so I'll intro a little bit of kind of the macro environment, how we are thinking about West-wide decarbonization, and then I'll hand it off to talk a little bit more about how we are interacting with our communities and partners. So if we go to the next slide, and please feel free to jump in with any questions you have as we're going here. Happy to have this be a bit of a discussion, but really just wanted to highlight how we are approaching our decarbonization goals. In Oregon, we're going to be carbon-free by 2040. And then I have noted here our first checkpoint on the way to zero carbon, which is an 80% reduction in emissions by 2030. So just kind of getting familiar with the carbon legislation in Oregon, the bar over on the left is a baseline. That's where PGE specifically was in 2010. Each energy provider in the state of Oregon will have a baseline that they build from. And then that bar over on the right, the 1.62 million metric tons, that's where PGE will be in 2030. So this slide talks a little bit about how we've started to navigate that journey already as we've reduced our carbon output, the things that we will do between now and 2030 over the next 7 years. But what I really just want to call everyone's attention to is that this will be a lot of different technology types, a lot of different locations for these sustainable solutions, whether it's clean energy generation, whether it is demand reduction and sustainability, whether it's renewables that are sited in the communities we serve. I think it will be a pretty broad partnership between PGE, the rest of the West, the communities we serve, and absolutely wanted to highlight that. And then the other thing I wanted to note as we lead into this is that as we plan to be one of the first energy providers in the US that is zero carbon in the next few years here, we also have some principles through which we are pursuing those targets to continue to serve affordably. We know that this will be a lot of investment and a lot of change, and we are prioritizing investments in clean energy that provide maximum benefit. And then closely linked to that, ensuring that we're serving equitably. You know, again, as we change the energy system, we're aware that that will be impactful And we're working to maximize those benefits and minimize impacts as we think about that investment. And then the other principle that we are pursuing this target through is one of reliability. And as we move from kind of the historic energy generation portfolio to one that is zero carbon, we're of course prioritizing that, when folks turn on the light switch, no matter the weather, the lights come on. And that's something that, we continue to have top of mind, and it had top of mind for the last 130 years or so at PGE. So as we talk about the journey to zero carbon and Oregon's or kind of PGE's place within Oregon as we do that, just want to have folks keep those principles in mind. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Isaac, thank you. So wanted to zoom out a little bit more, and as Oregon has set a policy target to have energy providers be zero carbon, we know that that exists within a broader landscape in the West. And as we can see here on this map, virtually every state or province in the West has a carbon reduction goal. The 3 states on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, and California, all have carbon-free goals. Nevada has joined with a carbon-free goal. And we're also seeing utilities, energy providers, kind of stepping into that space. So we see a couple states here that have no stated policy at the state level. I just want to note that those are served by energy providers that have stated their corporate intent to go zero carbon. And then another one here in Idaho, where their incumbent energy provider has said that they will reduce carbon to zero by 2045. So I think that there is an opportunity as we look out across the West for partnership, and to make sure that not just here in Oregon, but our neighbors throughout the West are also working to decarbonize. And we're kind of looking at ways to partner and ways to help make sure that they have similar commitments to affordability, to equity, and to reliability as they reduce carbon on their own systems. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to you here, Isaac. Like I said, folks, if there are any kind of questions about this as we go, please feel free to jump in.
Thanks, Jacob. And I'm Isaac Barrow. On the challenge of what to include for my bio, I think it's probably that I'm fortunate enough to be in the room with people who are much smarter than me and take advantage of their incredible knowledge. While Jacob gets to work with some really big numbers in the power origination team, so my focus is our commercial offerings and figuring out what we can do to, what is essentially our role in this democratization of decarbonization. I practiced that word twice and I still messed it up. But essentially, what's the customer role? And so, like kind of Jake mentioned, these critical factors on the top right that have always been the standard by which grids are measured, reliability and affordability, are now also, they're still always going to be critical factors, but just as important or of emerging importance is the resiliency, the cleanliness, and the flexibility of it. And this is really what we think of as this integrated modern grid. So if we jump into that flexible side of it, we have a really good sense of what flexibility on the generation side means. This is when we scale up resources like solar, like wind. They're not like our old generation resources that were kind of like a switch, or like hydro. Hydro is very consistent in that it, based on a lot of the regulations that monitor them, they just put out what we call base load. Wind and solar are different. They're a little more flexible. They surge as our planet breathes. And the other side of flexibility is what can we do on the load side, on the demand side, to match that flexibility? And that's where you have this nice intersection of both the evolution of the grid and this concept of democratization, still can't say it, of decarbonization, because there's more and more of a role for a customer to play in order for us to continue to be reliable and affordable. And that really comes down to flex load programs. And I'll get into some examples, some specific examples of what we're doing in this area later, but there's really this picture of this evolution of the grid and DR, and hopefully everybody, this is a room full of architects, I'm hopeful most people here understand the concept of flexible loads or demand reduction, but really the evolution over the next decade is moving from direct load control, where we send out a signal, to basic two-way communication, to eventually this truly optimized and rapid virtual power plant environment. And I don't know how many people pay attention to California energy, but some of us are big nerds in that sense, and they play an outsized role. But a couple of weeks ago, they were dealing with a heat wave and they were getting close to peak. And there's this great example of this direct load control in that the governor authorized a reverse 911 text to people, and you saw their load drop by 2 gigawatts. And to put that in perspective, the amount that their load reduced was about 50% of our total load, which is kind of crazy, but not necessarily what we want to do. We don't want people to respond to text, but there is going to be this important growing role for flexible loads. And so these stats are from our last year's ESG report. Right now, about 22% of our residential households are registered in some form of DR program. And this can be our peak time rebates, which really is that send a signal, get a response. Hopefully you participate, to more nuanced programs like our residential smart thermostat program that works directly with compatible Google or Ecobee thermostats to be responsive to the grid during certain environments, to our commercial programs where we go through and create a very customized load reduction plan and set the communications protocol to enact that plan individually with larger customers. So where we sit today is about 62% or 62 megawatts of flexible load in our programs, and where we need to get to is about 500. And this number includes both demand side and customer side things, but also actions that we can take as the utility to include distribution or closer to demand side flexibility. And this is things like batteries. For example, last week, Jacob, correct me if I'm wrong, last week we did the ribbon cutting on Wheat Ridge. Yeah, excellent. And Wheat Ridge is unique in that it's the first generation station that combines solar, wind, and batteries, which is fantastic to have the batteries at the supply side that can provide some of this flexibility. People always ask, if I'm plugging into my thermostat, is it really meaningful? If I'm choosing not to do dishes during a peak load, is it actually meaningful? And I love this example. I apologize, it's a little dated. It goes back to June of 2020. At the time, we had about 90,000 people in our peak time rebates program. Simple text message asking people to modify their behavior slightly. What you see in this graph is the daily load projection, a testament to Jacob and his team's work. There's very little difference between the daily projection of need and the actual need. That's the slightly orange line, up until we get to when the PTR event was called. And you see a noticeable and significant drop there, that while each individual participant was 0.12 kilowatts, not a ton, but the overall load reduction during this event was 11 megawatts per event hour. Going back to that California example, some of us nerds tend to look at the CAISO public website and look at the pricing for energy on the California market during these times. Pricing as of 3 weeks ago in that event got north of $1,500 per megawatt. And so that is significant savings, because if we're not having to procure energy in that market, or if we're lucky enough to have energy to sell into that market, that financial benefit gets directly passed on to customers. That's the beauty of the investor-owned regulated utility model. What we do saves everybody in this journey. And that's not just carbon savings, but it's also financial savings as well. So where we'd like to head, we're in this, I think most people are probably familiar with some version of this slide, but where we really want to get is to continue that evolution of that earlier slide to actually get into a VPP, where one of the critical roles of the utility is actually as an optimizer, where we can communicate with the solar panels on Jeff's buildings, hopefully the batteries that Jeff and many others have integrated into their buildings, our solar resources as well as other people's solar resources, even your water heaters, where we're able to really optimize how everything works together so that we're achieving the maximum carbon benefits or decarbonization goals. And to get there, everybody and every building has a role to play. I'm gonna try it one more time, in the democratization of decarbonization. So I know we're running short on time, but here's a sample of the programs that we have that are active right now. My team's actively working on adding to this list quickly. We have some ambitions. We really see a role for flexible loads for everybody on this call to play. And we really want to grow this portfolio from what we see now to a portfolio that gives everybody some way to plug into a VPP. And I think that's it for slides. Happy to take a question or two while we transition.
Thank you so much.
Oh.
Go ahead, Jacob.
Oh, no, sorry, Ellen. I was just going to ask if we should talk through questions now, or what's the next step?
Yeah.
You know, if it's all right, we had a question from Aaron that I think could be kind of quick as we're transitioning to Chandra and Jacob, and that is a question for Isaac. Is PGE setting up a commercial demand response program?
Yeah, actually, great question. We have two that are available right now. There's one that is aimed at for small businesses that is a commercial thermostat program. So if you don't necessarily own your entire space, but you at least have access to a thermostat, you can enroll your smart thermostat in a program very similar to the residential smart thermostat. Our second most successful DR program, Flex Load program, is actually what we call Energy Partner on Demand, Energy Partner Schedule 26. And that is the one where we'll work with individual commercial and industrial customers to come up with a custom load plan for their building that allows them to elect when they want to participate and how much notice they want and how they want to receive that notice. We actually have people that run entire manufacturing lines, paper mills, that will still take a phone call the day before and choose to shut down a line, to some more sophisticated customers that have integrated batteries or much more automated responses where we simply send a signal to their building energy management system about 10 minutes before the event.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you to you both. I really feel like that was an important piece of the puzzle that was great to cover. So there are a few more questions for you guys, and we'll get to those after the next presentation. So hang on, Trevor and Jay will cover those shortly. So it looks like Chandra's ready to go.
Sure am. Thanks very much. And I'm Chandra Robinson, principal of Lever Architecture. And I think one of the most important things that's related to what we're talking about here today that's in my bio is that I like to create spaces that are accessible to everyone. And that's not really about ADA accessibility. It's about getting lots of different people involved in the project. It means that sort of the design is really designed for the actual people who are going to use it. So it feels very welcoming to them. And it's really about sort of engaging with our local markets. So that's what I would say about that. Thanks for the question, Ellen. And so Lever Architecture worked with Meyer Memorial Trust to create their new headquarters. It's over on Vancouver and on Vancouver Ave, not in Vancouver, Washington. So Meyer Memorial Trust really focuses just on Oregon, and they provide grants that focus on innovation, sustainability, education, equity. And so what they really do is just try and make a flourishing and equitable Oregon. And the reason I start here is because the project really started from them wanting a high level of sustainability as well as a high level of equity on the project. So that really started from the top down. Michelle DePass was the CEO at the time. She's a Black woman. She hired Anjali Halava from Project PDX to be the developer. Anjali is also a Black woman and hired Lever Architecture and me as the PM as a Black woman. So starting out with this, woman strong team was a great way to kind of get us all on the same page. And you're able to do all of these great sustainable and equity things in your building if you have everyone on board on your team, which we absolutely did. So this really was a mission-driven project, and we wanted the building to really reflect their values around sustainability and equity as well. These are our partners that we worked with, not including our subcontractors that were on board, but we really tried to make sure that we were getting in women-owned and minority-owned and emerging small businesses to participate. And that outreach also extended out to subcontractors to make sure we're getting a really diverse group of subcontractors. So kind of focusing on sustainability, this really just shows you some of the things we really thought about: optimizing the roof design for solar, testing indoor air quality and having high level of filtration in the systems. We had about 85% of the wood was in our definition of sustainable wood, which I'll share with you. Stormwater is infiltrated on site. It's right on a busy street, and it's in a neighborhood, Lower Albina, that has been has changed over time, where folks have been moved out and different things have come in that are not really housing related. And so coming in here and trying to kind of help spark some of that development in the area was really important to the plan. So, thinking about designing the building, this is what you think about first: flat roof, mechanical units on top. And then we knew that we wanted to get some energy generation. So adding solar panels meant we changed the shape of the roof. And then we kind of flattened it out even a little bit more to get a little bit more sun on there to really optimize. And then thinking about that, we realized that's a great benefit just because we can hide all of our exterior rooftop units inside the attic space. And it still also gives us room for our elevator overrun. But then on the north side, because those south side roofs are where the panels are, on the north side, we were still able to get in 2 skylights that got some soft north light into the building. And so it was really about starting very early in the process and thinking about sustainability all the way through, as this project is a LEED V4 Platinum building. Thinking about biophilic strategies, those were really important for the folks working inside of the building. And I'm going to go through some of these very quickly, but you'll always be able to go back and look at them again. But thinking about access to light and views for everyone who's in the building was really important, not just the people in the corner offices. The sustainable wood package was really interesting to work on. So that was a $750,000 wood package with only a 3% premium for making it a sustainable wood package. So 85% of what we procured was sustainable wood. 49% of that was FSC certified wood. And in the project, we also used half BIPOC businesses and small businesses. So our sourcing criteria, we worked with Sustainable Northwest, and our sourcing criteria was based on Meyer's values. So number one was getting products that were from, that were local, that were from either minority owned or tribal enterprises, and places where we could understand how the forests were being managed and that they were ecologically, they were working well. So number two was prioritizing FSC certified wood. If we were not able to get something from a tribal enterprise or a minority owned business, we'd go with FSC certified or salvage wood anywhere we could. And if we weren't able to get either of those, then we would prioritize the wood from the region. So Oregon first, Pacific Northwest second, which kind of goes all the way up into BC, and then North America third, but not choosing anything from overseas. And so this, having that small cost for the sustainable wood package really meant that we were getting products that were pretty close to the site. So that sort of brighter dot right there is where Meyer Memorial Trust is. And we got flooring and ceilings and trusses and mass plywood all from in our area. And the reason to really focus on that is that not only are we choosing things that help us shrink our carbon footprint, but it means that we're helping to sustain and support our local rural economies. And for me, when I really think about sustainability and equity, it's very much about, it may not be my actual neighborhood that I'm protecting by doing work and thinking about sustainability, but it could be someone else's backyard, someone else's community that's impacted by choices I made. And I'd prefer to not do harm to other people's communities. So I really think of it as much bigger than just sustainable. So wood sourcing kind of shows up in all of these places in our space. So it was the Doug fir veneer on all of the casework and the big leaf Oregon maple that came from just down by Salem. Again, this Linnea wood flooring came just down by Salem, and the mass plywood itself that's in the convening space all came from Lyons, Oregon, from Freres. It's the only company in the world that makes mass plywood. And cedar siding was local as well. And then thinking about equity in terms of all of those, it really was about having, art from Indigenous communities represented. We also think about the material sourcing as part of the equitable design strategies. And then thinking about spaces and going beyond ADA so that people with different body sizes felt really comfortable in all of the spaces that we were in. So these are a few images of that. So you see that from the exterior. There's a big porch that we kind of pushed in. You can see the slope of the roofs for the solar panels. It's a little daytime one. This is a co-working space down here that they will let some communities use and small businesses use as well. Here are some images of that mass plywood that comes down from Lyons, Oregon. So that's here in this convening space, as well as the big mass plywood stair you see there. Thinking about this is also work that was done, sustainably sourced wood, and was constructed by a minority and woman-owned team for whom we were giving them a stretch opportunity, which means that they may not have worked at that scale of a project or that level of finish of a project, but we knew that they could do it and perform well, so they were brought there. Thinking again about equity, it's just representation of different communities that are local to Oregon. And then creating spaces where everyone could move around freely. The chairs, we had folks try out like 15 different chairs. You know, if you think about equity in terms of body size, some people like arms on their chair so they can help push themselves out of the chair. I myself with a bigger body do not like arms on the chair because oftentimes they pinch my hips. And so just kind of thinking about all the people who are going to be using the space is equity as well. Equal access to daylight and views for folks who are not in a private office. Everyone has a gorgeous view here. And then being really connected to the landscape was also really important to Meyer. And all of the art representation of the building was also something that people really loved and made them all feel welcome and joyful. And I think that's also part of design. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Jacob now.
All right, thanks, Chandra. And I'm really honored to be presenting after Lever presenting the Meyer Memorial Trust building. It's one of my favorite buildings, and it's definitely one of the few that has such a compelling sourcing story. So definitely enjoy following up that presentation with sort of what we did for the Portland Airport project, and especially because we used one of the same consultants, Sustainable Northwest Wood, to help us with that sourcing. So that's a common thread here. I know Ryan Temple's on the call as well, was a fantastic resource to kind of help us with this project. So let's see, give me 1 second here. I need to share. I need to change the screen that I'm sharing from. There we go, screen one. Got 3 screens. Okay, so yeah, we're talking about PDX, America's favorite airport. We're doing a lot of things out there in terms of renovations. And part of that is giving it this new mass timber roof. So it's 400,000 square feet. In terms of the area, it's around 2.7 million board feet of lamstock and 3x6 timbers in that roof structure that we're going to talk about today. And I always like to tell people this airport has won 8 titles for America's Best Airport, not World's Best Airport, from Travel + Leisure magazine. So every time I tell somebody I'm working on this project, they say, Jake, don't screw it up, basically. So no pressure. But I think that the mass timber story has the potential to, similarly with Meyer Memorial Trust, have such a really compelling story around cultural and environmental stewardship. So I'm hopeful that we're not going to mess it up. In terms of the criteria, sort of very similar to Meyer Memorial Trust, we had sort of different levels of local or regional requirements. We had certain landowners that we wanted to target that are generally disadvantaged or underrepresented in the supply chain. There was our own sort of criteria around environmental stewardship and sustainable forestry, then also embodied carbon, and really getting into the carbon mitigation impacts, going back to some of the titles or the thrust of this summit. How can we further that in terms of the use of wood, not only on the manufacturing side, but also on the sourcing side? And the kind of angle I really wanted to chat about here was really talking about how we can achieve these goals in new and innovative ways. And it all comes down to one thing, which is tracking and transparency. So thinking to the Meyer Memorial Trust building, the fact that they knew where their wood was coming from allowed them to have this criteria to make these claims. That's absolutely pivotal if we don't want to narrow ourselves in to a certification versus not certification, a local regulation versus not local regulation discussion around what does it mean to source sustainably or equitably. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how transparency opens up this criteria in kind of new and exciting ways, both for sourcing in general, but also for carbon, which I'll get to at the end, hopefully if I can stay within my 7.5 minutes. So this is a reason why this is difficult, this idea of just the simple task of knowing where wood comes from. And that's because the current supply chain, everything gets mixed up, right? At the lumber mill, just sort of the nexus of this nature, right? You've got lots of different forests that are going into a log deck that's all getting segregated, not according to like source forest, but it's by size, species, dimension, length, grade, so it can go through the mill as efficiently as possible. So what you get on the back end is sort of a blended source that can be maybe linked back to multiple different sources, but everything just sort of gets all mixed up. So very hard to have a source forest claim, much less a precise source forest claim. So one way we can move beyond that is just very simply asking, where did this pile of logs come from, right? Just in general, can you tell me, the mill has very detailed accounting of all the logs they purchased, all of the landowners they purchased logs from at what volumes during certain periods of time, for certain temporal scales. So in theory, we could actually at least know where it might have come from if we asked for this information. And that would allow us to then maybe move on to this next level of knowing where our wood comes from, which is called segregation, or even now where we might be able to have influence on where it comes from. If we could work with a mill that takes the right mill, the right project, and the right type of engagement to actually say, could you actually segregate logs from this kind of forest? Maybe it's a tribal source, or maybe it's a forest that we know are practicing really good ecological forestry. Put that in a separate pile, run it through at a certain time, and so everything on the back end can be directly sourced back to that forest of origin, and we can make our equity or ecological sensitivity claims according to that chain of custody. Of course, this takes a lot more engagement and effort, so it really is a process, right? And so those are the two spectrums of just simply asking where the logs were purchased from to get the blend, or going even so far as to be able to segregate and influence where your wood comes from. And for example, on the airport project for the ceiling members, so that's these 3x6 timbers that you see as the linear ceiling, in this image, 600,000 board feet, we were able to use that segregation process to know exactly where 100% came from. And that was both through working with big mills that segregated, then also working with very small, COBID certified mills to actually do more direct sourcing, where we knew that origin just by the nature of they're so small and they just know those relationships of what logs are from who in their log deck. And because of this, we know exactly the 9 different landowners from Oregon and Washington that went into that 600,000 board feet. And they all came from small family forests, tribal sources, community forests, nonprofits practicing, forest restoration. There's university experimental forests in the supply chain, but we know everything about every harvest of those particular 9 sources. And we can say things that we're supporting the Skokomish tribe in their forest restoration and their attempt at buying back more of their land and aggregating that ownership to have more autonomy over the management of their forests, right? Or that the biggest cut in the entire 9 forests were only 15 acres with 10% retention. Or that we're supporting fire resilience treatment from the Nature Conservancy, that's the bottom right-hand corner, where they're reintroducing fire back on the landscape in these these rural areas in Washington to not only transform their economy from a boom and bust forestry cycle, but something that has long-term staying power based upon a natural resource and recreation economy. There's so much going on with these and so much storytelling we can get into that is all possible because we can trace that wood back to its origin. But the question I think also more akin to the summit is, what does this mean for carbon? And because we know sort of where this wood is coming from, and because we know sort of intuitively that the amount of carbon sequestered or that lives on these landscapes is not the same, depending upon the forest practices or even the rotation age on these different land areas, if we can understand where that wood's coming from, we can get a little bit more well-versed or understanding of the impacts that we could potentially have. If we know where that wood's coming from, we can start to link it up with sort of new data that's coming out of satellite-based remote sensing that allows us to monitor the carbon stocks on landscapes over time, to where we can actually look at where our products came from, and was that forest just simply growing more trees than it was harvesting, or the opposite? And we can allocate that burden or benefit to the wood products that we use in our building. So it opens up a whole new world of carbon smart forestry, or trying to define criteria around really supporting the acceleration of carbon drawdown across the landscape. And in terms of how much impact does this have, it's huge. Early studies, and this is all just proof of concepts, very preliminary research coming out of EcoTrust, that when we look at just the manufacturing savings of a wood roof versus a steel roof, this is for the airport, even with biogenic storage, we could get up to a 15% savings. Airport's sort of a terrible example of a wood building to do analysis on, because it's just the wood roof and then everything else is like concrete and steel. So the wood has a relatively small impact. But look at the difference between these, right? We can almost double that savings when we include the carbon dynamics from the forest these were sourced from. And that spread is really large, which means it actually matters where we source this from, right? In terms of who we're sourcing it from and how they're dealing with carbon in the landscape, we can have a much bigger impact on our projects or a much smaller one. So it's really exciting in terms of thinking about all the different ways that we can have source forest knowledge in our project that ranges from simple asks to something that are very intense. We're trying to work on these, all of these, to understand really what does this mean moving forward and how can we scale this impact and approach from the airport to other projects. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up and turn it back to our moderators for some Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jacob. And Chandra, that was fantastic. And I just realized there's 2 Jacobs. That's not very common on a panel, so I'll have to be pretty specific. But jumping back to some of the questions we had earlier. So for Isaac and Jacob from PGE, there was a question about using EVs as a distributed battery system to help flatten demand spikes. Wondering if that seems like a viable source of flattening demand spikes in the future.
Absolutely.
Where do EVs play in the mix?
EVs are going to be a big part of the mix, and there's 2 ways to think about it. The first way to think about EVs is demand response. So when not to charge, and not just plugging it into the charger and letting it go from when you get home till the next morning. And that's already in flight. So we have both a residential EV, and I think the commercial EV should be coming out probably in 2023. But all that is not all that is, but how that works is in that first vein, sending signals to the charger so that it knows when's the right time to pull from the grid. The next phase of it, I think that was alluded to in the question, is not just knowing when to charge to avoid peak periods or carbon intensive periods, but how to get into vehicle to grid energy supply. And that's one where, like, the Ford F-150 Lightning, which I think is in some markets, has started to crack the door there, in that you can install a secondary panel when you purchase it that allows you to provide vehicle to grid for your home using the vehicle's battery. The technology is probably still 2 to 3 years out to go from vehicle beyond your own immediate home's needs in being much more of a flexible resource. And the way everybody's thinking about this is that you as the consumer retain the control of this. So you can say, hey, for next morning's drive or for tomorrow's drive, I want to make sure I have at least 150 miles or 200 miles of range. And I can use my I-84 as an example. Even if I say I want 200 miles of range, which is quite a bit for days of driving, there's still 50 miles of range available to supply back to the grid, or at least manage. So in all the scenarios, the end user gets to set the parameters of when and to what degree energy is used essentially by somebody else.
Excellent. Thanks, Isaac. And he followed up and said he already participates in the smart charging program, and it's great. So
that's fantastic. We need more and more of those.
And then we also had a question, I believe it was for you and Jacob, Jacob G, about it says, how is this effort being affected by hazards such as wildfire and seismic? So I think it was when you were talking about some of that content during your presentation.
Sure. Yeah. Do you want me to? I can provide a first response to this, Isaac, and you can jump in if there's anything I miss. Jay, great question. So I think as we are moving toward a carbon-free energy system, and we are understanding that we have seen kind of more extreme weather than ever in the past few years, and we're forecasting that will likely continue. We'll likely have to manage around issues like wildfires here in the West and in Oregon. And we also know that, at some point there's the potential for seismic activity, including a potential Cascadia event. And I think that the path that we are pursuing to make sure that we are decarbonizing and providing that reliability for the communities we serve means that we are a little bit kind of supplementing how a energy provider has served traditionally, right? Like especially in Oregon, a lot of times a resource, especially a resource like solar or wind, is located kind of elsewhere in the state where the climate zone produces the most energy, and then it is brought back to the Portland metro area over high voltage transmission lines. And I think that will continue to be the case in the future, but we're likely to see more community sited and community partnership type energy resources, so that if the power can't flow over those high voltage lines because of either a seismic event or wildfire, our aim is to be able to have communities that can just switch over to local power and to have that sort of configuration instead. So I think we're really approaching that as all of the above. I think the way you framed the question, Jay, was great, which is as we are kind of pursuing as a state this investment in clean energy, is potential hazards informing that investment strategy? And I think the answer is yeah, it is. And we'll likely get to a more community-centric, more resilient system in the future as we respond to that.
Yeah, and I just to add real quick to that, I think this really goes back to Jeff's analogy of the redwoods and the interconnected root system and how it supports each other, because there's such a strong connection between individuals or businesses responding to an increased need for resiliency at their end and how we can actually more reliably provide zero carbon energy. And batteries are such a great example of that. You know, you put a battery on a site because you want to have some form of resilience at that site. That's going to provide you the resilience during 1% of the use time. During the other 99% of the use time, it actually is a fantastic resource to help us decarbonize. And so like we have another commercial program that's our standby generation program that now includes batteries, and it has a significant amount that we can pay towards the installation of a battery based on it being used 99% of the time to help the grid decarbonize, and then be available during that 1% of the time to provide individual resiliency.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. That was a really comprehensive answer. So I think, Jay, if I'm sure they'd be willing to follow up if you had any other questions. We also did have a question. I believe this was for Jacob Dunn when you were talking about PDX. Was how does the client size, project size, and their requirements impact the desired sourcing?
Yeah, I think, you know, what's really great too to kind of present with Modern Memorial Trust is we get asked that question all the time, right? And really the thrust behind that question is that, is this an approach that is scalable and replicable, right? And the short answer is, you know, to some degree, the project size had an impact, in some degrees it didn't. And I love that like Modern Memorial Trust was able to achieve certain parts of that pathway as a smaller project. So I think the more critical thing is less sort of like what scale of project you are, and more kind of what premium are you willing to pay, and what level of engagement do you have, and how early is that engagement? Because like certain pathways of just asking where the wood comes from should be a no cost, you know, question that any project can do. Segregation, which is sort of like the most intense, you know, a large project might have certain benefits, but it depends on the mill size, right? Like a smaller project might actually have more benefits in that case. But in general, these projects are tiny compared to like what the mills are capable of. So we're all kind of small projects, regardless of how big we think it is. It's tiny compared to, you know, medium and small mills in terms of the industrial scale. So I would say that, you know, any project can engage with those, but it's really just going to depend upon how you do it and when. Great question, though.
Yeah. Chandra, is there anything you want to add kind of in?
Yeah, I mean, what I would add is that, you know, Meyer was a small project, 20,000 square feet only, but what we did with Sustainable Northwest, they wrote a white paper on it, kind of described our process and what the client's values were, and so what kind of decisions they were going to want to make. And so since then, you know, we've been using Meyer as a model for our other projects, which are all different sizes, right? To get sustainable wood sourcing in there and to make good choices based on, you know, the client's values, and then which are also our values. But so thinking about that for other projects that we've been doing, but Sustainable Northwest has also been doing that. They, you know, in that first process learned what it was that they could do. And so they've been working with tons of other projects and using the same kind of model. So I think it's going to get a little bit easier because Lever has also got a USDA grant to create a web tool database for designers who are looking for sustainable sources of wood. So if they're not working with Sustainable Northwest, or their contractor doesn't have connections to procure from different places, right, depending on how large they are, this will be a tool that other designers can use and just kind of see what's out there. So I think that's going to help with scaling, the fact that Sustainable Northwest is kind of growing and just making things better as they go, more efficient and getting more sources, right? So I think that's really helpful in thinking about the scale.
Absolutely. Maybe that's something we can dig into in the future on a future event here. Sounds like that's of interest with this group. And Jean had some follow-up questions. It sounds like you answered some of that, but maybe Jacob, Dunn, and Chandra, you can just mention like who does the sourcing work in your team, and kind of how does that come about? Do you bring in outside folks like Sustainable Northwest, or do you have folks internally?
For Lever, you know, we have a group of people who are really invested in, it's sort of our research and innovation team. And so they're doing lots of things. But one of the things they're doing is focusing on this, creating this tool, but they aren't the ones who are on every project. You know, we started Meyer, we didn't have anyone specifically focusing on that. So we really relied on Sustainable Northwest and the contractor, because that's work that they already do, right? They know where they get products from. And so that partnership really helped us, but now we have people in the office who are more focused on that. And even if we aren't working with Sustainable Northwest on that particular project, we are able to essentially do some of it in-house and work with the contractor and their procurement connections.
Yeah, and I totally agree with everything that Chandra just said, and would just add that I think it depends on the level that you're going for as well. Like, we're hoping that with the right specification language that we're working on, sort of generic spec template language that we could give away, that could just be plugged into part 2 of like the glue lamp spec or wood flooring spec or rough carpentry spec that says provide, you know, disclosure of log purchase inputs during X time frame. Then we could also provide a reporting template that could be given to the contractor, would have to give it to the fabricator and then the mill to just fill out this information. And that should be something that any team could do sort of turnkey. But of course, we're revising the template language like a 4th time, right? And hopefully that'll be available at some point. But if you want to go beyond that and actually have the influence part, I think that's really when you would need to bring on a Sustainable Northwest or have a contractor that's incredibly savvy and connected, because anytime you're asking these mills to do something that's not business as usual, has to come from an inside source, right? You can imagine an outsider coming into their industry and saying, oh, hey, we don't think your supply chain is sustainable enough. Can you actually change your behavior? That's like not the best way to start to engage into those conversations. So I think Sustainable Northwest and how well connected that they've been is a fantastic source to kind of start to engage in those conversations in a way that keeps people's open versus closing them off.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And, you know, I mentioned the digital design series just a minute ago. I did want to throw out that we are kind of at COTE, we're kind of revising that just a little bit over the next year. We're now going to be having sessions every odd numbered month from 4 to 5. And so you'll start seeing those sessions come out. Then the next one in November is on the AIAO 2030 challenge. And we're going to be pulling together signatory firms to share their history, barriers to reporting, best practices, and what's next for them as they deepen their commitment to net zero carbon. So essentially, if your firm is a recent 2030 signatory or you're thinking of becoming one, this is going to be a really important session for you. So watch for information about that coming in November. And okay, so we did have one other question. It looks like this is for Jacob G. and Isaac around how is PGE planning for increased future loads due to electrification of vehicles and building heating?
Yeah, good question. I think there are a couple different ways that we think about that, right? We think about as the Portland metro area grows and as we see more electrification from vehicles, building heating, those sorts of things. there is one aspect of it that is a day like today, right, where it's pretty mild in the Portland area, very temperate, not especially hot or cold. And we are kind of continually going through a process to make sure that we are tracking increased future loads due to things like electrification. So every 2 years, we file publicly a plan for what we are forecasting, what we are hearing from the market, how we are matching that load growth with future clean energy resources that can meet that while keeping us on our carbon trajectory down to zero. The other way we think about future electrification is the concept of a peak, right? So if we think back to last year where we had the heat dome in Portland, or a couple of years ago where we had some significant winter storm events, the electric load on days like that is pretty extreme. You know, it's sometimes as much as double as what we would see on a day like today. So on those days, I think that we are, as Isaac mentioned a little bit ago, looking for ways not just to make sure that we have enough carbon-free resources to meet customer needs on that day as well, but also look for ways to economically shift electric usage during those days to recognize that there is a grid constraint, and to ask folks to delay their usage by a couple hours or shift usage to a time where there's a little bit less of a need on the grid. So it's really kind of looking to build out different programs, different customer partnerships that on those peak days can help us ensure that we're prepared for that as well.
And I would just add that there's an incredible role that this audience can play as part of that journey. Like if you compare a building that's built to a living building challenge and what their daily load profile looks like compared to a standard office building, the load profile for a building that's built to a high standard is not only first off much lower because they're more efficient, their EUI is lower, but you're also going to have a much flatter shape. So there's less of a difference between the typical load and the peak load. So it's much easier for us to meet the carbon requirements. And like you can apply that analogy to buildings, you can apply it to systems. The load shape from a heat pump is much more desirable from a utility perspective than the load shape for an electric resistant water heater. And not only that, but the energy burden is also significantly less. And so things that are coming up in short order that I would encourage people who are interested to look for is we're doing an update to our deep decarbonization study. And that should be released within the next month or two. And then the big piece of pie that gets filed is going to be our clean energy plan that gets filed in February. And that'll include the document that Jake was referencing, which is our integrated resource plan. That'll essentially lay out what our plan is for the next 15 years of where we see the load growing and how we're going to meet it with carbon-free resources.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks, guys. And I think in our last couple minutes, Jeff, maybe I'll call on you to kind of send us home with some solutions. So, you know, what's been your biggest challenge in achieving equitable decarbonization in a project, and how did you overcome that challenge? And then that can be our inspirational note to take us home.
I don't know, you may have to go to somebody else for the inspirational note on there, but yeah, there was actually just something that came up, and I want to actually throw back out as a question. Chandra was mentioning, you know, not going in and robbing from other communities, but here in Salt Lake, Utah, we're looking to the Northwest for wood supply, but it comes from the Northwest. And I was just curious if the product that you're developing to help in equitable sourcing, does that extend out of the Northwest?
It doesn't, because it's only it's specified to be in places that we have all of this information already. We do a lot of work in Los Angeles as well, and a couple of other places in the country. And so I think what we'd like to do is extend that to where we have that knowledge and can put it together and make it available. But what might be great, because this will be open source, right? It's a USDA grant, is that potentially other folks can add their information for their region, because the way things are done, you know, in Arkansas are going to be very different. And there's, you know, different species of trees that are good for different kinds of things. And so I think it's something that has to be, you know, we can start it, but I think it has to be added on to by other folks in order to be useful kind of widely.
Well, I'll just throw in there, I'm not going to say this is our greatest challenge, Ellen, but I'll say a challenge that we observed from building these tiny homes. We're acting as the contractor too. It's the sourcing of wood, and it's for us. It's coming from the Northwest, and we're looking at FSC wood, and our policy. You always hear people say, "Measure twice, cut once." Well, we're trying to, when we build these homes, not take more stock than we need. And so our policy is measure 3 times, cut once. It's just, we can't afford to waste that product.
Nice. Thank you. Well, thank you so much to all of our presenters. We're at time, and thank you to everyone for joining us. I appreciated the questions and the participation, and the 50 of you that have hung in there with us. So thank you so much, and we will have a Green Champion Summit again next year, and we will have the DDS in the meantime. So definitely please join us for what you can, and reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Everyone.